All right, good morning. So we have talked a lot on this channel about the different philosophies that are out there. Obviously, we're coming from a conservative perspective, tracing our philosophy back to Edmund Burke, but we have respect for the other views that are out there. And I know we have a lot of libertarians on our page who have been asking about a third party and what that would be like. And fortunately, we have an opportunity today to get to talk to a man who's running for president through the Libertarian Party. So Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman, is an international speaker promoting the ideas that taxation is theft, that individual freedom is paramount to the government, and that we are not government property. He is the founder of the Taxation is Theft shop and host of the Taxation is Theft podcast. He is a candidate for president currently competing for the Libertarian nomination, a supporter of free markets, individual rights, environmental and social issues, and has delivered his message to over 6 continents, empowering people in some of the world's most impoverished nations. So I want you to see some of the content that he's putting out, all the good work that he's doing. We're going to show one of his videos right now.
I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman. I'm running for president because I've been let down too many times by the two-party system that constantly forgets a majority of America. I will fight for everyone's freedom. I believe that everyone has the right to decide how their money is spent. We should not blindly give it to politicians with our fingers crossed that they will not use it on wasteful and immoral programs. I believe our education system has failed, and we need to reclaim the right to decide how to educate our own children. We must end the drug war now. Nobody, no matter how good their intentions, has the right to tell you what you can or can't put in your own body, especially if you're not harming any other person. I will fight to get the government out of our bedrooms, bodies, wallets, and schools.
All right, so let's bring him on. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good, man. So I got to say, I've been looking at your stuff all week, and I love like everything that you're doing. The hat, that you do, the change. You have the middle name going on, the showmanship in your campaign. I think that's frankly missing from a lot of those other candidates, especially in the Republican Democratic Party. So you kind of bring that appeal. What's that been like, and how has that been successful for you?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, one of the things that came out of this is a lot of the international support that we have, which we weren't intending to do this. We were really just, we started out focusing on bringing taxation as theft to the mainstream in America. And so many people caught wind of it overseas that we just started growing an international base for it. So it's really just amazing to see. And one of the biggest messages or I guess the biggest strategies that we do is trying to figure out how do we get people who typically lean left or right to understand this idea, and we've made great progress in getting people who are supporting the socialists, the Democrats, the Republicans, everybody else to kind of open their eyes to see that what we're saying is actually going to be more beneficial to them than what the programs that their politicians are selling them.
Yeah. So one of the stereotypes that a lot of people have about the Libertarian Party is that they're radical to the point of isolation and not serious about policy, right? And so my question for you first is, when you're doing these different things to promote your brand and build it, do you run the risk of falling into that stereotype, and how do you overcome that?
No, I think absolutely not. And, certainly there are people that fit that description, but, what we've done is, in the international outreach, when people come to us and they say, hey, we really like your message, people reached out to me from Uganda, and that opened up an opportunity for me to go speak in Uganda to a group of, a small group of libertarians that are starting to share these ideas. Yeah. And that experience actually kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the ways that government is abusing their citizens in different parts of the world. And this has kind of helped us share ideas. So it's really the opposite of isolationism, because we now have an open dialogue in places where, typically people in my position who are, we do our jobs, we go to work, we spend some time on social media. We're actually connecting with people around the world where, a lot of Americans are just kind of, if somebody reached out from Africa, they'd say, oh, this is some scam. Someone just wants to get money from me. But, I started connecting with these people. They started connecting with some other libertarians here, and it's actually growing this huge network. So I think this is actually bringing a lot of people together in a different way.
Yeah. Talk to me about poverty for sure, because you mentioned Uganda. I've been there a couple of times myself. I actually just got back from West Africa last year, and seeing the desolation in Africa is pretty jarring. And then seeing the level of government corruption as well. is difficult. And then that third piece of it is the foreign aid that's constantly flowing in, and the questions that people have of, why is it not reaching the people? That's one question. And then the other piece is, again, going to those stereotypes of libertarians, is that a lot of times people think of libertarians as, well, they're just protecting wealth. They're just trying to protect
Right.
rich, or they're trying to throw off regulations so the rich can have their money. Can you talk about those two different things, specifically with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So first we have to recognize there's two types of wealth. There's wealth that you gain legitimately, and then there's wealth that you gain through theft or other illegitimate means.
Yeah.
And when we look at poverty, the first thing we have to understand about poverty is not being poor. Poor is not having a lot. And I've been around the world and met people who are poor, don't have a lot, but they have happy lives because they're not forced to, go to work every day.
Yeah.
Work 40 hours a week and raise money so that they can pay taxes and give all this money to the government.
Yeah.
When we talk about, people who are the wealthy, who they don't have to work as hard to get by. What we have now is we have a system that goes to the people who are working, points at the people who aren't working, and says, that's your problem. When the reality is, no, the problem is that you're working really hard because the government is stealing everything that you're earning. And then when you try to save up and you try to build your own wealth, they take that too.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at the wealthy and saying, they have all these houses and everything else, and we should have that. Instead, what we should be looking at is, no, we should build this for ourselves so everybody can get out of this labor pool, this idea that you have to work 40 hours a week just to keep a roof over your head that you already paid for.
Yeah.
Government is constantly taking away our means to take care of ourselves and survive on our own. And then, of course, they come around and say, well, it's, you don't have enough because everybody else has too much. But no, we don't have enough because the government keeps taking it from us.
Yeah.
And so we have to kind of shift the way that we think of things. And when you look at some of these other countries and foreign aid and everything, what usually happens is this is the illegitimate growth of wealth. You look at all these African countries that have such a tremendous wealth of natural resources. Why isn't everybody in this entire region prospering?
Right.
And the reason is you have these dictators and these rulers and these presidents. Some of them are a little bit more democratic than others, but usually what you have is you have your political elite who take money from other countries and say, hey, we want to use this money so that we can do such and such. The countries that are actually dumping that money in, they know that's never going to go to the poor in that country. That's to make the leaders happy so that they can send in their corporations, their militaries, and everybody else to extract resources. Right now, China's dumping a lot of money into Africa to build roads and airports and ports and seaports and everything else. And it's not because they're trying to help Africa grow. They're extracting resources. They're bringing their own labor. They're not even giving jobs to people who are local. And when you ask, well, why aren't the Africans extracting these resources themselves and selling them abroad? And the reason is because government doesn't let them. Government charges them ridiculously high import taxes to get the kind of machinery that you would need to be able to extract some of these resources. They're extremely limiting in people being able to start their own businesses. You need tremendous amounts of licenses and investments and everything just to start a business. And what that does is that prevents the local people from using the resources that they have, which means only wealthy people can come from other countries to extract those resources or create any type of productive operation.
Well, let me ask you about that real quick. So, you're talking about the spontaneous growth, right? That doesn't require the government to be involved. It seems to me that a huge part of that is education, right? That's what I experienced when I was over there. Is they're trying to set up these schools, and it's just very difficult to do that with the limited resources that they have, the limited proficiency that they have. So, talk to me about your views on education, because coming from our standpoint, from Edmund Burke and his beliefs, he believed that education was a huge part of freedom, that they had to go hand in hand. If you have a well-educated, responsible, rational populace, then freedom works. If you don't, then you can have chaos. So what are your views on that?
Right. Well, I think we have to talk about what kind of education, because they can be teaching math and science, and that doesn't really create freedom. We have a lot of math and science in the United States, but, the people who are typically engineers don't really think about freedom. But they have skills that are useful to bigger corporations. So they're able to engineer better machines that the corporations are able to, of course, sell and profit from. So, but when we want to talk about freedom and these types of things, if the people in Africa were more educated to understand, well, hey, you're free to be an entrepreneur. You're free to go start a business. You're free to go off and find any piece of unoccupied land and start a new city. With the resources that are there, you're able to pick a piece of land and build your own home and build your own farm and survive a happy life without needing to be a part of this big government organization. That's the type of education that is the core principle, or I guess the core information and knowledge that's necessary for freedom. But when you start creating schools and say, okay, we're going to teach people to be good at math, or we're going to teach people how to operate computers and machinery so that they can be productive, so that they can have better jobs. All you're doing is you're teaching them how not to be free, but how to be dependent on somebody else's economic system. Yeah. And so I think we need to really make that differentiation and understand that it's not that it's bad to teach those skills, but we have to understand that those skills are not fundamentally going to teach the ideas of liberty and freedom.
Sure. No, I get it. So kind of shifting back to domestic politics, when it comes to education, it seems like a lot of your work is just trying to educate people on the fact that there is a third option from what's soon going to be the main two, right? We're seeing the Republican Party is monopolized by Donald Trump, over 90% approval rating from Republicans. They seem absolutely thrilled with the job that he's doing. And then it really seems each day that Bernie Sanders has got the Democratic nomination. He's at least leading it, if not going to run away with it, especially with Pete Buttigieg dropping out, right? We could see other candidates dropping out this week or next week. With that type of thing happening, you're starting to see the progressive elements finally get their guy, right? Like with all the corruption that happened the last cycle,
right
now he's actually got that opportunity. And so you see these polarized elements in the party, in both parties, and you see, right, the people, that, hey, I've got my guy. Finally, we've got, the fighter in Donald Trump that the right has always wanted. And then on the left side, you've got, the extreme, I would argue, of their ideology that he epitomizes. And so people seem ready for this heavyweight fight. And yet here you are representing a completely different option. How do you actually break through to be able to show people that there are opportunities for something different?
Right. And I think this is an interesting one because I hear a lot of politicians that say, oh, we're not going to share what our strategy is. But I think it's actually very important to share my strategy because ultimately we have a lot of support from people who already believe in the ideas that we're sharing. And we need those people to be smarter in order to intelligently communicate these ideas to other people to grow this movement. Because it is a very grassroots movement. And so when we talk about Trump supporters or Bernie Sanders supporters, the most important thing to recognize is they're not stupid. Yeah. They're smart, intelligent voters, and they want certain things. They want different things. Yeah. And that's why, you have a lot of small business owners, people who are investing, people who want to retire, people who want lower taxes. And they say Trump is going to represent my needs and he's going to protect those. And so, of course, they support him. And then you have the Bernie Sanders people who, they're very interested in, I want to be able to survive. Yeah. And it is very difficult for a lot of people. And especially with college prices going up, with the cost of healthcare going up, all these problems, they're real problems. And, just because you support Trump doesn't make those problems go away. They're still very real. Right. Maybe not for you, but they are real for other people. Yeah. And so what's very important about my campaign is we understand what these problems are on both sides, and our solutions, which of course are always more in the direction of freedom, really will provide better options for everybody, and they will solve problems for everybody, and that's super important. So, to the people who support Bernie Sanders and want the Medicare for all, that's just one solution that they've heard to solve their problem. There's no other solution that they've heard, and we're actually promoting a second solution, which is to say, if you get rid of a lot of the restrictions that the government has on the healthcare industry, the prices will fall so low that you'll be able to afford your healthcare and your medication without needing insurance in the first place. In fact, it'll cost less than what you're paying for your insurance now. And that includes, if you just have a job and you're paying Medicare tax, which that's a tax that comes out of your paycheck, right? It's going to cost less than that. That money's going to go back into your paycheck. If you're healthy, you don't have to worry about paying anything. And if you get sick, you pay a very small amount to take care of it. And these are the benefits that, we tell to a lot of Democrats and the people who are becoming interested in the socialist programs because they hear it's going to solve the problems, and we show them this is much more realistic. And the benefit to this that's really awesome is when you look at the Medicare for all, what that really does is that gets more people to pay into the system, which basically inflates the entire healthcare industry, which ultimately means that these big 1% corporations are making even more profit. And this is Bernie's plan. Under our plan, what it actually does is it reduces that profit, which means the people get the power, the people get to keep the money in their pocket, and these 1% don't get to extort us over these medications. And so it really solves more problems than the Bernie Sanders solution is attempting to solve.
So we'll get into a couple of the ideas. I'm just what I'm responding to is we've had several of our followers talk to me about that, about the result of it. Right? Is we've had this conversation before with Trump and Hillary, and people said you support the lesser of the two evils. I'm sure you've heard that a lot. Let me give you one of the comments that one of our guys recently gave me. He said, "I don't agree with everything Trump says and everything that he does, but his platform falls in line with much more of what I agree with than what the candidates for the Democratic Party offer up. The two-party system is unfortunate because I'm sure there are better candidates out there, but it feels like a wasted vote going for any other party." Why is he wrong?
I wouldn't say that he is wrong. I mean, he's right in so many ways. And, like I said, everybody's got their own issues. There are so many single issue voters out there that, they have one thing that's very close to them. For me, it's taxes because I know how it connects to everything else. But I see it as a crime that's committed by government. And if I had to choose between two people, I would select the one that's going to be, that's going to say we're going to get rid of more taxes. Of course, I've learned from my past voting record that when we select these politicians, they'll usually tell us they're going to cut taxes, and they don't always do.
Right.
But so in that way, he's right, and it's understandable. And then you also have the wasted vote theory, which is, if everybody who is considering a libertarian voted for a libertarian, the libertarian might not get elected. And that's really what I've taken on in this job, in this role, is to say, no, look, it can happen. We do have a lot of work to do to spread this idea and get it to a lot of people in a way that they understand it, in the way that they see it as a benefit for them. And maybe if they're a single issue voter, a way that they're going to see it's a benefit for them. And once we hit a critical mass of people, that's where people are going to be hanging out wherever they are, talking to, hey, what do you think about this new political whatever? And someone's going to bring up taxation as theft, and someone's going to bring up libertarians. And once that starts happening and people see, hey, there are other people talking about this, that's when they're going to start realizing that's not a wasted vote. But until that happens, it kind of is, because, like once that happens, that's when we have enough people in the public who are willing to make that shift. And that's when it's not going to be a wasted vote.
Okay. So let's get into it. So in terms of your core message and what you're doing, because I think that relates. When you look at Trump supporters, and we have a lot on our page, the number one thing that I think motivates them is the feeling of a national pride. Is they have wanted for a long time someone who will fight for the American identity, right? That will hug the flag as Donald Trump does, that will talk, bring Christmas back, right? Doing all of these things that they associate with, the American way of life that they don't feel that they have heard from the Democratic Party. And so you have him coming in and believing these things, feeling this national pride, and articulating it constantly on his Twitter. And so, when it comes to taxes, that may be part of it, but they feel a connection, a nationalistic connection with him. Is that something that you share? Do you consider yourself a patriot?
Right. So it's a really interesting question, and there's definitely some pros and cons to it. But I think, that's kind of built into our DNA to have something, to have an ideology that we can really grab onto and say, this is what we identify with. We're pack animals, right? So we want to have some sort of representation that we can say, that's us. And for a lot of people, it's the American flag. But I think there's something even more important than that, and that's ideology, and the ideology of freedom. So you have a lot of people that are constitutionalists, and of course the Constitution it's a lot of words. It's not necessarily a symbol, but if we can create a symbol that's something more simplistic than that, sort of like the taxation is theft flag, that's something that everybody can really get behind, and it doesn't need to divide nations or geography or races or anything else or languages. really, it's an idea that everybody can get behind, and we've got people who support this in Hong Kong, in Australia, all over Europe. We've sent our taxation as flags, taxation as theft flags out there,
Yeah.
and they really love this idea. And so this kind of creates that same sort of feeling that nationalism gives us without limiting it to borders, but broadening it to all of humanity. And I think that's a really important concept, because especially since we do have a lot of Christians who support Trump, and one of the most important commandments was not to worship false idols.
Yeah.
And is that what we're doing with a flag? What does the flag represent? Especially when you have a flag like the American flag. And if you ask any American, what does that represent? You're going to get a million different answers. Some are going to say freedom. Some are going to say, we're the world's strongest nation, or the world's leaders. There's going to be so many answers that you get. And because of that, whenever you wave that flag around, you're saying different things to different people. And that's extremely dangerous. If we're going to all stand behind one symbol, we should all agree on exactly what that symbol means.
Okay, so beyond the flag, then, you mentioned the Constitution. So it seems like there could be a distinction or a difference between you and what the majority of the American founders believed, right? Because clearly in the Constitution, they didn't believe that taxation was theft. They included taxation in the document, right? Article 1, Section 8 has taxation being authorized and Congress being allowed to use that power. And yet here you are saying that, no, taxation is theft, it's bad. How do you reconcile the difference between your platform and the Constitution and what the founders believed?
Right. So, well, first I would say the Constitution is absolutely not perfect, and there would be, some different ways to correct it. But if you look at those taxes that are authorized there, they're actually authorized in a way that's not necessarily a violation of consent. And you go back to the Declaration of Independence, a lot of people, they like to say taxation isn't theft. Taxation without representation is theft. But that's an idea that had nothing to do with the American Revolution. If you read the Declaration of Independence, that said taxation without consent is theft. In today's world, taxation absolutely means if you don't pay it, government's going to come for you and they're going to do something to you. And that's absolutely theft. When you look in the context of the Constitution and the taxes that are allowed, most of them are really consensual taxes. You look at the direct taxes that are levied on the states. Well, the states voluntarily agreed to sign that Constitution. Their representatives signed that Constitution saying our state is going to be engaged in this union, and as part of that engagement, we are going to pay a tax based on the number of people that we have, and that's the apportionment. It doesn't say in there that we can apply a direct tax to the people, only to the states. Now, if those states are raising that money through theft, that's another issue. But if those states are raising that money through some sort of voluntary means, whether it's their lottery or selling state services, then that's absolutely voluntary. You look at some of the other taxes with the government, and those are excise taxes, and those are in the Constitution. And when you read those, an excise is we talk about excises; those are exercising privileges, which is also voluntary. So, for example, if you were to say, okay, the government has this military. I want this military to protect my my cargo ships as they go in and out of the ports.
Okay.
I want that protection from them. That's a privilege, and I'm going to pay for that a certain tax. And so that's voluntary. If I don't want that protection, I should be able to not pay for it and have my ships and maybe provide my own security, whatever that might be.
But let me
now,
ask you
of
this,
course,
though. What you're doing is you're defining consent on more of an individual basis. Is that right? Is saying taxation is less of theft, or it's okay or it's justified whenever consent is in play. But how do you really measure that? Because you go back to the founders, right? And historians generally agree that only about a third of Americans actually supported the revolutionary movement. Another third didn't care either way, and then another third after that actually probably supported the British. And so here you have this third of Americans and the founders themselves saying "we the people," as if everyone agreed when they didn't. And you look at the way our system works today, in any Republican government, you have representatives who act on our behalf, not always with our individual consent, but more of a general vote that says you're the guy, you're going to think for us. And the same thing with the democracy, where you have 51% of the people vote for something, and then the other don't consent, and yet they have to live under it. So how do you build a system on individual consent when it really hasn't been part of history at all, especially in our country?
Right. Well, and these are really difficult questions to answer, especially when you get into like the philosophy of what is a crime, because ultimately government is to protect us from crimes
Yeah,
and resolve disputes, and that's it.
yeah,
When you have government that overreaches and says, what you're allowed to do in the privacy of your own home or in the privacy of your own business, that's an overreach. And when we have
okay,
51% saying, two men aren't allowed to get married and live in the same home, then that's a violation of their rights.
okay,
And so when we start to look at it like this way, then we can understand that when a government is created, and this is a discussion you can get into with anarchists,
yeah,
that you create a government. That's absolutely legitimate as long as that government does not infringe on the rights of others. Now, some people will argue that, the fact that you've created a government and called it that is an infringement of someone else's rights. I disagree. The
okay,
moment it steals from somebody, the moment it locks somebody in a cage for something that somebody else doesn't agree with, that's when it starts violating somebody's rights. The fact that it exists, if it raises money voluntarily, if it creates programs that without stealing is able to provide valuable services to the public or to specific people,
yeah.
I think that's absolutely fine.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I
So,
like how you came back to rights. You came back to these principles that we believe in, that government should not touch. Right. These specific freedoms that we should have based upon higher law, natural law. Whatever you happen to believe there, but they're principles that we can agree upon that say, look, this is government's realm, and this is not. When you come back to these rights, I think that's where we could find some common ground in saying, yep, there's a difference between government making a decision to set up a park and 60%
mhm,
of the residents say, yep, we want to pay for it, and 40% say, I'm not sure. And then they go ahead and move forward with it because of the vote, as opposed to the examples that you just laid out, where they are specifically, attacking an individual and preventing them from doing something they want to do. So I think that nuance is really
right.
interesting. I would also suggest that that's the seriousness of your campaign, is being able to have this discussion with me here, and being able to sort through the nuances and the difficulties of how do you apply this. It seems like you've got a very catchy tagline and an awesome, marketing strategy that's working for you, and then you kind of suck people in to a nuanced, difficult philosophical argument, as you said. And I think that's really important for people to see that about you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, hey, thanks for your time. Really appreciate you coming on. I learned a lot. Wish you the best in your campaign. Love to have you back on. So, thanks again. Thanks again, Dan. Really enjoyed having you
Absolutely.
here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.